Okay, this is section 5.9, number 23, and in this section we had been doing things one of two ways. We did guess and check, which is kind of the traditional way of doing this, and then we did factoring by grouping, which took advantage of stuff we learned in 5.10, and so we actually learned that a day early so that we could kind of do this. So if you remember, let's do it with factoring by grouping, and if I have time on the video, I'll do it with also by guess and check. All right, so if I'm going to factor by grouping, I know what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to rewrite this middle term. And so one of the things we did is we took advantage of the little organizer we had. We're trying to multiply to get, and here's how I figure this number out when I'm factoring by grouping. It's the number out front and the number at the end. It's not just the number at the end anymore. So it's going to be 2 times negative 3. We're trying to multiply to get 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. And in class, I had told y'all that eventually you're going to kind of label this way, ax squared plus bx plus c. So it's like the a and the c term if you were to label it. And again, we haven't done that yet because we haven't talked about graphing quadratic equations yet. Okay. And then at the same time, we're trying to multiply the number out front and the number on the end, and we're still trying to add to get the number in the middle, and there is an invisible positive 1 there, so I'm going to put the 1 there. Now, if you think about what would work, let's see, you know that 2 times 3 is 6. You know they have a difference of 1. Which one would I make negative? Because if I've got a negative number and I'm multiplying, one of the numbers has to be negative. Oh, it would be the 2. 3 minus 2 is 1, or negative 2 plus 3 is 1. But negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. So if I'm going to rewrite my middle term, I'm going to copy down my first term. I'm going to rewrite my middle term, and I'll use green so you can see where I'm getting the numbers. I'll call that a negative 2xy and a positive 3xy. And then I'm going to just write down my last term, negative minus 3y squared. I always keep my first term and my last term there. All right. And again, we try to put this in order before we even start trying to do this factoring by grouping, where the square's first and a number's last. This is just a weird problem because it has a square in the first term and the last term. Now, if you remember what we did next when we used factoring by grouping, we said we're going to just pair these numbers up like this. And in each pair, I'm going to look for the GCF. So the GCF in the first two terms is going to be a 2 and an x. That's its GCF. And what I'm going to do inside of here is write my leftovers. If I have 2x squared and I divide out 2x, 2 divided by 2 is 1, which I could write down if I needed to. But here I've got something else. I've got x squared divided by x is x. I could have 1x, but we would just leave the 1 off. Now I'm just going to say copy down your subtraction sign here and say 2 divided by 2 is another 1. The x comes out, but there is a y left. So instead of writing 1y, I'm just going to write y because, you know, if there's nothing else left, I need to write the 1 down, but if there's a y left, 1y just becomes y. Now let's go to the second set of terms, and I'll use a slightly different color. I need its GCF. Well, if I look, both of these terms have a 3 and they have a y in them. So I'm going to take a 3y out of both terms. That's my GCF of those two terms. And here's my leftovers. Okay, so the leftovers there, if I have a 3xy and I take the 3 and the y out, I would have an x left. There's a subtraction sign. A 3 divided by 3 is a 1. Well, I've got y squared divided by y leaves me a y. I could write 1y, but we'll just write y. That's a dot. That's a stray dot there. Now, the good thing about it is we always need this to happen, and this has happened. These things in parentheses match. So they're my new GCF. So I'm going to pull those out front. And then if I think, well, what's left over out of each term, we saw in class that we could just write down the 2x out of the first term and the plus 3y out of the second term, but let me talk through it in case you still kind of need it broken down a little bit more. My first term is 2x times x minus y. If I pull the x minus y out, what's left? 2x. So I write it down here. I have a plus sign, so I'm going to write it down. If I have 3y times x minus y, if I pull the x minus y out, the 3y would be left. We could have just read off 2x plus 3y and have written it down. And this is factored now for number 23. I'm going to do guess and check since I have time on the video, just because some of you are doing guess. Option is guess and check. So if I have 3m squared plus 11mn plus 6n squared. This isn't too hard to do by guess and check. Remember with guess and check, we know we're going to have something like this going on. One of the reasons this isn't so bad is my first term here, 3m squared, there's only one way to get it. I don't have options, so I know that's going to get written down that way. And now the other part that I kind of know is that I've got 6n squared down here, and I know that what goes here and what goes here has to be 6n squared. I know they're both going to have an n in the term, so let me just write it down. The problem is I'm trying to multiply to get the 6 there, but there's choices. I can say 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. A good thing about this problem, again, is there's all positives here. This doesn't get too complicated because we don't have negatives going on. Now, the deal about it is these are the options for the n, but remember there's a 3. When I do my little multiplying to get my middle term, we talked about how we could draw these little connecting things here, which I call upside down rainbows or smiley faces. Those multiplication of those two things and then add them together gives me my middle term. There's a 3 that's out in front because of that 3m squared out front. How can I combine these numbers to get an 11? Because remember, I'm trying to get 11 in the middle, and it has to be these things multiplied and added together. Well, if you look at it, this one, again, sometimes you just see it. 3 times 3 is 9. And then 1 times 2 is 2, and if you add those together, you'd get your 11. So I know my 3 here needs to get multiplied by a 3 here, so I'll put my 3 there. That's going to give me my 9mn. And so then I needed the 1m I had right here to get multiplied by a 2, so the 2n would go here. Everything's positive, so I can put my pluses in. 2n times m is 2mn, and if I add those together, I get my 11mn. I could have used guess and check and done it, and it wasn't too bad here. So you know, use either method. I'm not going to make you use one over the other. You're just going to pick what makes more sense to your brain and what you tend to be able to do easier. A lot of people like guess and check because, you know, it's a lot less lines of work. You're just figuring out numbers to the side. So people who can manipulate numbers in their head or can see it if they just write it down tend to prefer guess and check. If you want just a method to just kind of slog through that always gets you the answer, then you might like the factoring by grouping for these problems.